Hey everyone, it's Ivan, kitpatcher.com, out here today to talk about the value in doing hard things. People, myself included, largely go out of their way to be comfortable because no one really wants to be uncomfortable. I get it. Like, hey, it's really hot in here, I'm gonna open a window or turn AC on, whatever it may be. Having said that, when you do hard things, one, they're usually uncomfortable, but through that discomfort and through those hard things, usually the opportunity to learn and also kind of gain perspective. So by way of example, recently I ended up doing a pretty hard thing. I think it was right before Christmas 2022, I decided I was going to go out, go do some filming and shooting. So before the snow came, I managed to go out and stash a steel plate as well as a 2x4 in target stand. So I was like, be able to ski out here, do some cool filming and shoot guns, which I enjoy doing. So I was like, let's do this. And I loaded up my pack, tried it on. I was like, this weighs like 100 pounds, literally about 100 pounds. I was like, I do not want to ski with that. So I was like, how are we going to do this? Fortunately, I had my sled from a sled adventure, did some videos on it like a couple years ago, 2020, I think. And I'm like, let's just do that. So load everything up in my vehicle. Basically, my pack had like a bunch of warming layers, guns, ammo, filming equipment, tripod, all that stuff, and like water. And threw all that stuff in my vehicle with my sled, my skis, boots, all that stuff, and headed up, drove up to basically the top of the saddle where kind of the road is maintained, like it's usually plowed. I was the only vehicle there. The road was pretty sketchy. I was like, if I get stuck, like that's the end of the adventure. I'm gonna just turn around and come back. But I ended up managing to get up there to the top. I did not want to have to back down this thing. It's like 6-7 mile grade, something like that. So made it up to the top. And at that point, ended up pulling everything out and getting ready to go. Keep in mind, for whatever reason, I'm pretty sure it was like record-setting cold for that day. Pretty sure it was. Basically, that day, at that point in time, I want to say I was stepping off around like 11, like late morning, and it was -8. So it was pretty cold. Cold enough to where there are consequences. So knowing it was so cold, basically had some hand warmers inside of these mittens, had my hands in there, but then also when it's that cold and there are consequences, layering and all those things end up becoming really important. And so I had, I think, a soft shell pants by Beyond, and I also actually had feet warmers inside my ski boots, like under my toes. But I had these soft shell pants on, and then I ended up having the, I believe it's their Scalarworks level 2, like little hoodie, also by Beyond. It's basically like a layering piece. But when I first started off, it was also windy. So dug through my vehicle. I did not want to pull out like heavy insulation layers. Dug through my vehicle. Fortunately, I had, also from Beyond. Reviewed it a while back. Basically, it's kind of like a little windbreaker. I had it stuffed into a day pack just for emergencies. So threw that thing on. Also had a little neck gaiter and a beanie. Again, -8. And started out pulling the sled. Continued to go, and I was kind of started bargaining with myself because it was like, hey, you know what? It's nice, the sun's out, it's beautiful. I know it's about 6 miles to where I would like to go. Do I really want to go all 6 miles, film, shoot, and then do 6 miles back? I'm like, maybe we'll just call it a training evolution. Maybe we'll just go to 3 miles where it branches off the one like logging road, and then ski back. 6 miles round trip. But kept going and eventually got to that turnoff where I had another 3 miles to go if I want to go down that road. And I'm like, you know what? There's value in hard things. Let's do this. So ended up continuing on down that road. Largely, it was pretty easy going, kind of staying in snowmobile tracks. Once I branched off, largely still a couple snowmobile tracks, and yeah, just kept on going. Eventually grinding out those other 3 miles and then turning off onto this other little track where there weren't any tracks. Definitely got a little heavier, like dragging that sled, but ended up going over, and finally I'm like, all right, let's do this. Went, set up my target, then got back to the sled, and I'm like, I need to get dressed because I'm no longer going to be moving. So again, going back to those layers, like not wanting to wet something out, but also making sure you don't get too cold. Still had my hands in those mitts, and it was actually so cold that I would basically pull my thumbs back from, like, again, mitts, so like pinchers. I'd pull my thumbs back and shove them in with my fingers, and I'd have that hand warmer right there, and they would just be on my poles as I was going. It was pretty cold. So I get back to all my stuff, and I start pulling some stuff out. And so I immediately throw on my level 7 from Wild Things. They're basically their Marine Corps happy suit. Throw on the pants, zip those things on, throw on the jacket, zip that up, and pull out the knuckle roaster, which I believe this one's actually by Tac. Throw hand warmers in there, 2 fresh ones, as well as the ones that were in my gloves. Throw them in there, and then put on some contact gloves. I think they were the SKD ones, the Presscheck salt gloves. Again, really, really cold. So I have my hands in there. And then it becomes one of those like, hey, there's a number of tasks I need to do in order to be able to do some filming, which I want to do. So those tasks being like, 1, I need to get my camera set up. So that means my tripod needs to get set up. I need to pull out my camera case, basically this like Pelican case, get that out, throw the like shotgun mic on there, all these other little things, right? So there's a window of time in which you can do these things though, because it's cold and there are consequences. So the hands would come out, and I would like set up my tripod, and they would immediately go back in. I'd hold those hand warmers. I'm like, okay, what needs to happen next? Because you're dealing with like pretty small window of time. And if you end up getting too cold, it takes a really long time to get warm again. And it's also really unpleasant. Usually hurts really bad when your hands are warm. And if it goes too long, again, consequences like death. People end up dying of hypothermia all the time. So hands warm up a little bit, they come out, set up my camera, go back in. I'm like, okay, I need to get my gun, need to get the can out, grab that, hands back in, put on like chest rig and stuff, hands back in. So finally I'm like, okay, I think I'm ready to go shoot. And I basically set up this course of fire. I actually recorded like, hey, here's a rundown of the course of fire. It's cold, like below 0, but there's a target down there about 100 yards. Gonna start out right here at about 100 yards. 2 hits on steel with the rifle, ski up to 75, 2 more hits, ski up to 50, 2 more hits, ski up to 35, 1 with the rifle, 1 with the pistol, ski up to 25, 2 with the pistol, 20, 2 with the pistol, 15, 2 with the pistol, 10, 4 with the pistol, back to 15, 2 with the pistol. Basically just skiing to these different yard lines, and then shooting rifle, and then at a certain point shooting rifle, and then transitioning to pistol. I want to say like 35 yards, and then pistol on in. Well, again, there's that window of time, and I knew my hands were cold, and I knew they would be cold like in that evolution, but I was like, I'm impatient, like I don't really want to wait for them to warm up. So I ended up shooting through that first course of fire, and it went terrible, because by the time I ended up with pistol, my hands were really cold, and I threw all kinds of rounds. It was not pretty, but well, it's what happened, because you lose dexterity, and yeah, pretty hard to make shots. But I ended up getting through that first evolution, and I'm like, okay, we need to adjust this because one, I only brought so many bullets, and I do want to like essentially shoot this again. So ended up adjusting it some and shooting back through it. After getting another 1 or 2 runs, ended up doing some more shooting, largely I think some pistol up closer, and then I was like, well, I have these sweet new turbo lights on my guns. Let's do a little bit of night shooting. So ended up doing that as well, both initially just kind of doing some stuff with pistol, and then going back and basically making that run again, this time under white light, essentially after sunset, like once it was dark. And that was actually pretty challenging. So now it's dark, probably colder, and still got to get home another 6 miles. So I end up peeling stuff off, armor, helmet, all these different things, working at putting my camera away. Again, bite-sized pieces. So hands go in there. I'm like, okay, let's get this put away. Shuffle that around, get that put away, hands back in there. I'm like, all right, what else needs to happen? Do something else, hands back in. I'm like, all right. I'm now at the point where I'm wearing my like heavy insulation layers. Again, by Wild Things, they're level 7. I'm like, I don't really want to take this off. I'm gonna be cold, but I don't want to end up getting too hot. So I'm like, okay, we can do this. I can just start going, and then if and when I need to stop, I'll peel the stuff off, put it away. So ratchet straps, basically everything down, so everything's really secure. Learned that lesson a while ago on the first couple sled adventures, and started heading back. Eventually, well, actually straight out the gate, it was already dark. So I had not brought a headlamp, but I'd brought my little everyday carry light, which at the time was the Streamlight Macro Stream. So it actually has a provision to put it on the bill of your hat, turns into a little impromptu headlamp, really handy. When I started it was -8, so I had a beanie on, no ball cap. So I'm like, okay, whatever, how am I gonna do this? So basically on the pack belt that I was pulling my sled with, there's a bunch of Powell's webbing. So I managed to clip it in there and it would just shine like 5 feet in front of me. So a pool of light and darkness, and started going. Started cruising back and kind of, yeah, trying to get back to my vehicle. Before kind of too much time had passed, had started to warm up. Again, exertion. I had those hand warmers back in my mitts and was going. I'm like, okay, I need to pull these layers off, even though I did not want to. Because once you end up wetting stuff out, that's like where you get in trouble. So that's the importance of like good base layers that'll actually wick moisture away. Because like if you're wearing cotton, something that just holds moisture, then you get in a lot of trouble, because as soon as you stop and start to cool, it actually pulls even more heat from you. So having those good base layers, like I was halfway there, but what I didn't want to do was wet those out. So ended up stopping, pulling that stuff off and securing it. Keep in mind, when I went to go do that, again, flashlight just clipped to my pack belt. So I need to take that thing off so that I can actually like use the light, see what I'm doing. Super dark out. Don't have the bill to put it in. So I'm like, idea, I'll just clamp this light in my teeth like I usually would. So I go to do that, and immediately when I do it, I feel my tongue and lip freeze to the light body. It's an aluminum light body and it's negative whatever at this point. Immediately pull it out of my mouth, tear skin off my tongue and a little bit off my lip. Super unpleasant. And I'm like, maybe I'll just like tuck it under my arm. Or at one point, I think I shoved it up like inside between my hoodie, between my beanie and my head. Also very cold, but wasn't gonna lose skin to it. And got that stuff off, put it in there, started going again. With a lot of opportunity to just look at this little pool of light in front of me and think about my tongue that was hurting. But kept grinding it out. And I knew at that halfway point, I was gonna converge with this other trail, like logging road basically. And I would stay left and I would eventually come to my vehicle. So I just keep going and going, and you have nothing but time. And all I could see was basically this like snow 5 feet in front of me. Like that was my pool of light and just blackness. And you're just with yourself. Like in my case, dragging like a 100-pound sled at night in the dark. And yeah, like not super easy. Just basically grinding those miles out. And there's also, it was weird too, because there's just no reference as far as like, oh yeah, like I just passed this. Like you could look up sometimes and you could basically see openings. Like you could see really deep shadow for the tree and then you could see stars. So you're like, maybe I was here before. Obviously I was, like I could see my tracks, but there was no reference for like how far you had gone or anything like that. And eventually you also get to the point where you start bargaining with yourself. Like it's so cold. Again, my hands are back in there, or my thumbs are back in my mitts trying to go. And I don't want to stop, because when you stop, there is one fairly short window of time where you can be static before you need to put layers on, or you get in a lot of trouble and your core temp drops. And then with that too, anything that I needed to do, you pull those mitts off. And yeah, I have these like contact gloves, not these, but the other ones I had, thinner. And you have this very short, finite window of time. So whatever you need to have happen needs to have happen within that window of time before you put those mitts back on. Or if you wait too long, like now you can't get those mitts on and now you're just in a really bad way. So hadn't drank a ton of water. So I'm probably a little bit dehydrated. I know I have water in there in an insulated container, put it in warm, but it's also buried. So I'm like, do I really want to try and dig that out right now? And the answer was no. So I'm like, okay, knowing I'm a little bit dehydrated, approximately like how far do I have? How much of a expenditure is it going to be with respect to just energy and stuff like that? Can I make it to where I need to go and be dehydrated and not like be in a really bad way? And I'm like, I could probably do it. So keep basically just shuffling along. Kept looking for basically that intersection of those two logging roads. Not that it was like really well marked, but I'm like, I'll probably see it, even though I just have this little pool of light in front of me. And I'm going. I hadn't checked my phone, which had intermittent service at best, in a while, and I knew basically coming out took about 3 hours, essentially about 2 miles an hour. Not a fast pace. And so I'm like, okay, basically about an hour and a half in, like I should hit it by then. And so I'm going, and again, I didn't want to look at my phone because the mitts have to come off and you have to stop. Did not want to do that. So cruising along, and finally I'm like, man, if I haven't hit that like halfway point, like I might be in a bad way. Like I might need to start reevaluating some of my choices. Some, like there's no going back on, like I'm out there already, but like, hey, maybe we do need to stop, throw our layers on, dig out some water, hydrate, because this is just taking forever. And part of your mind's like, am I lost? And I'm like, no, like there's my tracks, like weird Twilight Zone episode. So finally I end up pulling out my phone and I look and I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure, because also some of the trees that were over on my left are lower. I'm pretty sure I'm past the halfway point, like by virtue of time and from what I could kind of make out in the silhouette of the trees that were to my left. Then at that point I'm like, okay, probably not super far from the vehicle. So put it away, grind it out, and make it the rest of the way to my vehicle. Again, taking about 3 hours. Finally got to my vehicle, definitely relieved, started up. Heater did not want to come on. I think it eventually came on, but started that thing up. And quick side note, if you're wondering if I brought Peanut, no. I was like, Peanut will probably die on this adventure. It is too cold for him. So I ended up actually having a friend go get him. And if you're wondering like comms, emergency plan, also same friend, I was like, hey, listen, I'm going here. This is what I'm going to do. If you don't hear from me by this time, because I have intermittent service, then yeah, you should probably send someone out because something's gone wrong in a bad way. But made it back to the vehicle, loaded everything up, and then still wasn't like out of the woods. Had to make it down this grade, which managed to do without going over, because if you go off the road in the snow, like you know that little gully on the side of the road, you will not get back out of that. So took my time, got down the grade, went back, picked up Peanut, back to my house, warm shower, and probably a hot meal. Oh yeah, a quick note on food. So that entire adventure bringing me to, I want to say 9, 10 o'clock at night, was fueled on 2 cups of coffee with a bunch of heavy cream in it. Made it work. And part of it, with respect to, if you've seen any of this stuff on carnivore, essentially your body gets really good at burning fat, like ketosis. And so as long as you don't push past a certain threshold, like think sprint, something like a ton of exertion, then your body just can pretty much just cruise and maintain, which is what I ended up doing that day. But quite an adventure, not very easy. Some of you are like, there's Peanut. Some of you are like, that sounds incredibly miserable. Why would you ever do that? Well, a number of reasons. One of which, opportunity to learn things. So what did I learn? Well, I learned that when it's negative however many degrees out, don't want to take a metal flashlight and try and clamp it in your teeth. lesson learned. Will not do that again. Some of you are like, yeah, of course you wouldn't want to. In the moment, you might think it's a good idea. It's not. Ask me how I know. But a lot of things, so back to learning, a lot of things, whether it is like layers. So when you end up layering clothes, because you're going to be moving, and regardless of temperature, well, especially when it starts getting colder, I guess, because that's when wetting stuff out is actually really dangerous. When it's hot, like if you're sweating, you can't really get away from that. But when it's cold, figuring out what works. So you have mechanical ventilation. So at a certain point, like I could unzip like that windbreaker. I'm not sure if I ever did because it's hot. But the other thing is the hood on that Solaris Beyond hoodie. I could pull that thing down, mechanically vent, or if I start getting really warm, I can take the beanie off, again, being able to vent that way. And then the other part though is just appropriate layering to begin with. So figuring out kind of that threshold of what you should have on, and then also knowing, hey, I might be a little bit cold when I step off, but I probably am going to warm up pretty quickly, and this should keep me kind of in the window of comfort while I'm exerting myself. So we have those layers, we have how we can like mechanically vent and stuff like that, to include just like remove layers if we need to. But then the other one, which I guess was probably more on my way back, when I had that high loft from Wild Things, really nice and warm, you also have your pace. So hey, at what pace do I need to move so that I don't wet layers out? And it also goes back to, if you have almost no layers on, like how fast do I need to make sure I'm moving to stay warm enough to where like whatever layering that I do have actually works. So yeah, lots of opportunity for learning. And then with that, yeah, doing hard things, like it also creates perspective. Did I set out and like want to go do that? Not really. Like, yeah, I was like, hey, I want to go do this. Like, stop being lazy, Ivan. Like, let's just go do this. Didn't really want to do it. But I committed to it and I pushed through and I ended up doing it. And when you end up going through, and also keep in mind, like my hard things might not be your hard things. This might be something like, I don't know what the big deal is. Like, that's a Wednesday. If so, like, awesome. Whatever hard for you is like your hard. Conversely, maybe that is like, there's no way I would ever do that in my life. All right, well, there's something out there hard that you could probably go do that would arguably give you some of the same lessons. The opportunity to learn things, and to include kind of learn things about yourself, your capabilities. Again, think physically hard more than like just mentally challenging. If you want to go do crosswords, go for it. But yeah, like what is that threshold of capability with respect to your physical ability? And then the other thing is that perspective, which I've mentioned before. When I'm grinding those miles out, like in this pool of light, about 5 feet in front of me, what matters? Like all the little petty things in your life, like that stuff disappears. Like you realize that stuff doesn't matter. I mean, what matters right then and there is not dying of exposure, which is pretty important on like the hierarchy of things. But with that, you start to catalog things, and you're like, oh, like this microaggression I felt over here, like whatever, man, it doesn't matter. And I think honestly that perspective more than anything is one of the most valuable things or the most valuable thing rather to come from doing hard things. One of the things I really enjoy is going backpacking with my boys. And up until fairly recently, pretty much every backpacking trip, there was a window in there where there were tears. Because it's hard. You are under load, you have your pack on, you're moving for hours, however many miles, it gets tough. It's tough for me. I don't usually cry about it, but I have since gained perspective and appreciate doing difficult things for the value that comes from them. My boys, maybe not so much at that point in time. So we stop and we talk about it. And with that, they end up gaining perspective to include whatever it is. We'll be out somewhere and I'll be like, oh man, like this. And I'm like, you guys remember we hiked the Haleakala crater with 1 bottle of water and you guys in flip-flops, 12 miles. So is this really that big of a deal? And it's like, yeah, I guess not. And that perspective just plays itself out across everything. And I think there's a ton of value there. Not that I want to go torture my boys. There's absolutely a balance. But by doing hard things, it lends perspective to where you're able to face what comes at you and progressively do harder and harder things. So does this mean you should go out and do something very difficult and super dangerous and maybe die? I would not encourage you to do that. For my own part, what happened if I broke a leg out there? Well, I had my primary plan of, hey, you will hear from me by this point, or send help. I also had a radio with me, and again, limitations, physical limitations. If I ended up breaking a leg, I'd probably just put on my level 7 and crawl my way out of there. And if I couldn't do that, then I would make myself as warm, as comfortable as possible and wait for help to come when my call did not end up going out to the person that was basically waiting for said call. So yeah, largely everything I do is calculated on some level based off of prior experience, physical ability, capability, all of those different things. I would encourage you to do something difficult, whatever that may be, again, scaled to you. It doesn't need to be something monumental, but something to basically create some perspective and maybe learn a thing or two from the experience itself, or maybe even just about yourself. But there is value in doing hard things. And as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.